Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast. Over 250 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack 4 business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Franz-Grote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You, Inc.
Today's topic is, every leadership challenge is a teaching challenge. Question to ask yourself, how can leaders at all levels align their personal values with their organizational mission to create meaningful change? And our guest today is Jim Salvucci from Guidance for Greatness. Dr. Salvucci brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from his 30-year career as an English professor, school dean, university vice president, and now refocused on empowering leaders in the corporate world. As a former C-suite higher education executive, Dr. Salvucci has mastered leadership as both as a discipline and a practice, teaching leaders and emerging professionals how to align their values with their organizational mission. His expertise in writing, communication, and leadership coaching, combined with certifications from Thrive, Tiny Habits, and Harvard Institute for Management and Leadership, makes his approach uniquely impactful. Jim, welcome. How are you? And what's your favorite quote or saying, sir?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me, Bernie, Wayne. Appreciate it. So my favorite quote about leadership comes from Dwight Eisenhower, and I never quote it directly because first off, I have to update it for modern sensibilities. But it basically comes down to leaders get people to do what needs to be done because they want to do it. And I love that because it's about motivating, it's about inspiring, but it's also about a focus on values and mission, right? That mutual commitment, that collaboration. That's what leaders do. And I think that's a wonderful quote.
And is there a business tagline you work with?
Move from challenge to change.
So you're in academia and now you're into the coaching universe with a wealth of knowledge. What brought you from one to the other?
Luck. Part of it was I was in academia for decades, for 30 years. Doing various things. I was an English professor, like you said, then I went into administration, did that for about 10 years at several different smaller institutions. Really was struggling as I was a vice president. I was a chief academic officer. I was in charge of everything academic at the institution. It was a big job. I loved that. I absolutely loved the job. But I was working for, not in every case, but I had one big exception. I was working for presidents who were train wrecks as leaders, who were just bullies, gaslighting people. And I spent all my time just protecting people. And so I ended up on the receiving end of that, left higher ed just in February 2020, just as COVID started hitting and schools started shutting down. Was having a really hard time dealing with these schools and their nonsense about, oh, we're too busy. Oh, we interviewed you, but we can't even be bothered to respond to your emails because we're so busy now with COVID stuff. And I'll be honest with you, nobody was predicting COVID, but I've been saying for years in higher ed that we're in this crisis mode all the time. And this doesn't work. If everything's a crisis, nothing's a crisis. You can't call everything a crisis. You can't prioritize. You can't move. You can't think. And when we have real crises, which is very rare, but when you have real crises, you don't know what to do. So here was an international crisis and the whole system collapsed, just collapsed. And so I'm on the outside now looking in and thinking, this is what I've been predicting for years. And I don't want any part of it. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to remake myself, leave the world of employment and go into the world of self-employment. And so I decided, what was it I used to love most about being an administrator? And I really did love a lot of the job. I love problem solving. But my favorite part was mentoring young leaders to become great leaders, working with people to bring them up, just like I did when I was a professor. And so I decided that's what I'm going to do. And I started a coaching practice, and now I've moved into speaking and writing. I have a book coming out sometime in early 2025 called Greater Than Great. So look for it in Amazon or any bookstore. And so that's what I do now. I love it.
A quick question regarding the leaders that you've looked at and in the past haven't worked out well. What makes them that way?
Do you have several more hours? I get asked that all the time by people. And it's a great question. It's a very legitimate question, which is why people ask it. But I have so many answers because there's so many factors. In fact, I'm seriously thinking about writing a book on that very topic because I have so many things to say about it. One is, very simply, the models they've seen are crap, right? The people they're emulating were horrible leaders, right? They don't have guidance. They don't have, that's what I do. I help people, I guide them so they don't have to be like that. I'm not looking for leaders who are broken to work with. I'm looking for leaders who don't want to be broken, right? That's who I work with. That's who I speak to. So these leaders out there, they model themselves after bad actors. They're very weak-willed, frankly. They don't have the strength of their convictions. They don't have character, which in my framework is the number one thing a leader needs to do, is develop a solid and whole character in order to be reliable. And then from there, you can go into there's 4 elements of leadership. They go in the other 3 elements. It's character, then they can communicate, then they can compromise, and then they can build collaborations. That's what leaders do. I call it the 4 C's of leadership. These people don't even have the first one, not even close. They talk about values, but they don't live values. I don't care how good a person you think you are. It's how you behave, right? No one can be just good inside. He's behaving badly. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. He's behaving badly. Oh, she's a really good person inside. She's really horrible on the outside. That's what you need to look at, how people behave. And when you look at your own values and what you believe, it's manifested in how you behave. So if you want to know your values, look at how you behave. So those are just 2 big factors right there. And there's many more. By the way, personal corruption is another one. And I don't mean taking money, selling yourself out.
You talked about the connection between leading and teaching.
Mhm.
Can you hit me the moment when it came to you?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember I was sitting at my desk. I've been a leader my whole life. I was like maybe 12 years old. I was in Boy Scouts. I was asked to lead my troop. I was not old enough. I didn't hold the proper rank to do that. But the scoutmaster came to me and had me basically acting as assistant scoutmaster at 12 years old. I was a boss at 18, right? I had employees at 18. I've had these positions all my life, whether I wanted them or not. Sometimes I just got thrust into it. I became an English professor, thought I was going to put that sort of behind me, got a full-time position at a school outside of Baltimore. Within a year, I'm a faculty leader, right? We have a faculty council. I'm part of that. Next thing you know, I'm leading the faculty council. So I never really escaped leadership. And I was pretty good at it. I don't think I hurt too many people, which is your number one goal as a leader. Don't do no harm. But I was what I call a gut leader, right? I was intuitive. I was good at it, but I didn't know why. Simon Sinek says, start with why. I hadn't thought about, why am I good at this? Eventually, I got asked to be a dean. I was asked to be the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which was great at my university, except there was no School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I had to found the school. I had to create it. I had to bring together 15 disciplines, make them work. And I thought, oh, this is actually easy. You put this with that, nuts with bolts, just management. That's easy. But trying to get it running and up and running and keep it running, that's what really was the challenge. And that required a more in-depth version of leadership of what I've been doing in the past. And now, by the way, the stakes were way higher. So I had to figure this out. I started thinking about leadership as a discipline. And I started studying leadership. I was reading things like Simon Sinek and trying to figure all this out. And at first, I looked at my bosses for guidance, and there's a perfect example: lousy leaders. So no help there. My peers, flailing about wildly, imitated them for a while, hated myself, hated what I was doing. So I moved on from there. And one day I was thinking about how I needed certain skills to be a leader, and how do I develop those skills? And it dawned on me, they were the same skills I used as a professor, had the same skills I used in the classroom, I was using for leadership. And we're talking about communicating, including listening, empathizing, being able to take complex problems, break them down into parts, assigning things to people, guiding them, not doing it for them, not micromanaging. All these things were the things that made me successful as a professor. And I realized leadership and teaching are pretty much the same thing. So that was my aha moment.
People being different, of the same yet different. Some of us are like being in the weeds. Some of us like to be 1,000 feet up, looking down. So there's a little bit of complexity in there. Like even though like we all eat and sleep typically, how do you take that mixture of people and it's almost like funneling where you take them especially if you're mentoring, how do you funnel them so that based on how you're operating, your basically your operating system, how do I take you from that? So if you're PC or Mac or Linux, how do you funnel them? How do you make that come together for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think leadership is analog. You just go with what you know, what you value. It always goes back to that idea of character. Who are you, right? Ask yourself why. Why do I behave this way? Why do I feel this way? Ask yourself those questions because it all begins with self-awareness. Once you have self-awareness, and it's not just awareness of like, how do I behave, but also how do other people perceive me? Once you start thinking about that, then you can move on to other things and challenge yourself. It doesn't matter. We have this idea like, oh, I'm an introvert or oh, I'm an extrovert. Those things are fluid, right? You change in time. In fact, I'll tell you this right now. I'm an introvert. I may not be coming across that way right now because when I'm on a podcast or I'm on a stage or I'm talking to a group of people, guess what? I'm instantly an extrovert, right? None of these things are immutable. None of these things are written in stone. And people love to hide behind those labels, right? Oh, I'm a big picture person. Oh, I'm a little picture person. Okay, well, everybody's a little mixture of that, and you can change through circumstance. So recognizing all that, recognizing who you are, and also that you can and will change. The idea is to get yourself to change for the better. That's where you start. That's the very beginning of it. And when I'm coaching people, we're always exploring that, even if it's not real explicit. How did you end up here at this moment now? A lot of people have imposter syndrome. That's very common. And they don't feel they're worthy, right? They don't feel that they belong where they are, but you got there. So how did you do that? And once you start thinking about how you got there, those kinds of negative beliefs, those limiting beliefs start to go away.
Something that I've heard you speak about that is different and I think incredibly valuable is that your values have to interface, hopefully even mesh with the organization's values, or you're going to cause problems. Either you're not going to be giving your best, you're not going to be getting the best, and you're not going to be building the best. Can you tell me about your personal values aligning with the mission of the corporation?
Yeah, it's simply put, they've got to, right? You can't be compromising your personal values in order to fulfill a mission you don't believe in, nor should you be sacrificing the mission. Now you can transform a mission of an organization through legitimate means, but if the mission is counter to that, if it's counter to what you believe, what you think, who you are, how you want to behave, if you're doing things you don't want to do for the mission, you're suffering from cognitive dissonance if you have any decency in you, right? And all those things that you describe, Wayne, that breakdown in behavior, that all will flow rather naturally from that situation, from that cognitive dissonance. So you do need to align. Now that might mean you need to leave where you are. I was in situations where I supported the mission of the institutions very much. In fact, in one case, I helped write the mission. And my values actually aligned with the missions of the institutions. Guess whose didn't? The presidents I reported to. Okay, again, with one exception, right? The presidents I worked for, their values didn't align with the mission. And let me tell you, that was bad for everyone, including the students who were supposed to be helping.
How does a leader articulate the company's values so there's that chance for interplay?
Yeah. First off, through your behavior, right? Model it, live it, be it, right? That goes a long way, but that's not it. That's not the whole thing. So the last college I worked for, sleepy little college, rural Appalachia, very impoverished area, very isolated, small college, lots of great facility, like nice facilities, fantastic faculty and staff, very devoted, people working for peanuts and devoting their lives to the students. Horrible administration, right? I was part of a team that was so dysfunctional, it was hard to really describe. But I needed to get my job done, which is running academics. I oversaw the faculty. Faculty at universities are incredibly powerful, right? They have governance, right? They actually vote on policies, right? And depending on the school, it might be advisory, it might even be official, right? What they're doing. And so I had to work with the faculty, and the faculty are generally very resistant to change. Like, you'll never meet people more resistant to change than college faculty, university faculty. And there's good reasons for that. That's not a criticism. It's a fact, because when you're a faculty member, you spent your entire education focusing on one narrow area. You wrote a dissertation on I wrote a literature dissertation at the University of Toronto on early 18th century British travel writing. These are very narrow focus, narrow bore research interest. You teach courses that are very narrow. You're rewarded for being narrow. There's schools that won't give you tenure if you're a generalist, right? If you're too broad. They want to see your research all focused. Oh, you went outside your lane. We're not going to give you tenure, okay? So your entire world is this, you're drilling down. All your education, all your training, and the reward system are about zeroing in on minutia. And then someone says, okay, we want you to look at the university as a whole. Talk about cognitive dissonance, right? This does not compute. So how do you get people to do that? So what I used to do is I would have monthly faculty meetings, right? All the faculty in a room. And there I am, and I put up a PowerPoint. And the first thing we did with the PowerPoint is I put the mission of the institution up. And instead of reading the mission and just reciting it like it's some sort of mantra or something, which just goes in one area, not the other, we'd hold a discussion about some phrase in the mission. What does that mean to you? Right? And that got everybody engaged. And what that did was, psychologically, it pulled them immediately out of that small bore, small thinking mode and put them into a larger thinking mode, right? And now they could see the bigger picture, at least somewhat. They were in the mood for it, at least. And then we would talk about that, right? And I was very explicit about this too. I would talk about big picture, but here's what it looks like. So they knew where I was coming from. They knew where they fit in. A lot of faculty go through their entire careers and don't understand how they fit into the university beyond, I teach courses, I do research, I go to meetings, sit on committees. That's all I do. They don't see the big picture. What I did was I helped them understand that, and then we can make decisions together. And it was really collaborative after that.
It almost sounds like you become a Leonardo da Vinci, but yet more than one. You're an artist, you're a painter, anatomy, understanding science.
Yeah, that's a good point. Leaders are Renaissance men.
Do you find that when people, if they act like a boss versus a leader, that the person acting like a boss, it's not an easy life. You're actually making yourself miserable and the people around you. You're acting like a leader. Things seem to be smoother. Is there a correlation like good health?
Yeah, I would say so. Look, think of the bosses that you've known, right? And I always make a very strict distinction between bosses and leaders. Think of the bosses that you've known. Did they seem like happy people? Maybe they had lots of stuff. Maybe they strutted around. If you're strutting around, are you happy inside? If you're showing off, are you happy inside? If you're being mean to people, unless you're an absolute sadist and you get off on that, which unfortunately is exceedingly common, you're pretty miserable. And even then, you're probably pretty miserable. I'm not saying leadership is a path to happiness. I'm not going to make that claim, because you can be a really good leader and you could be working in an organization that's horrible. You could be working for bosses that are horrible. That's not a panacea. But you're at least at the end of the day, you get to go to bed and think, I lived my values. I did right by my values, by my personal mission. I did not violate my values. If at the end of the day, you're probably not a happy camper. So I would say, yeah, I think a lot of bad bosses are just miserable people. I can't think of a bad boss I've had, and I have had so many my whole life. I can't think of a bad boss I've had who wasn't just deeply miserable as a person.
Something that is core to your mission is very subtle, and I'd like you to unpack it. you believe every leadership challenge is a teaching challenge. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. So leaders approach things as teachers, whether they realize it or not. And by the way, teachers approach things as leaders and very often don't think of themselves that way, which is just a crying shame. I'll give you an example. About a year ago, I was actually working with a group of administrators at a school in New Jersey. And I had no idea exactly how this was going to come out, but I took a risk. And I just had one of those Post-it pads up in the front of the room. And I said to them, okay, I want you to describe think of a really good teacher you've personally known. And I want you to describe the qualities that made that person a great teacher. And they put together a list. And then I said, okay, now I want you to think of a leader that you've personally known, not someone pie in the sky, but someone you actually have worked with who's a great leader. Just start making a list. And then we started putting it up on the Post-it. And I made the list of the teachers' qualities. And then we got about halfway through the leaders' qualities, and they went, oh my God, it's the same list. What is the distinction between teacher and leader? Circumstance and title. Nothing more, nothing less. Teachers use leadership skills, leaders use teaching skills. And the other corollary to that is every great teacher, and I'm not talking about mediocre teachers here. Don't think of your lousy 6th grade teacher or something like that. Great teachers, every great teacher is a great learner. They're interested in learning. They want to know more. Same with leaders. There's a saying that leaders are readers, right? Leaders constantly want to improve. This ongoing learning, lifelong learning. Great teachers indulge themselves in lifelong learning. They want to learn more. They want to get better. Leaders are exactly the same way. Great leaders. It's literally the same skills.
Come up to a business. And I say someone says, Jim, help us. We're not sure if we're on track, or actually, do they reach out to you when they're off track, or they're trying to make sure they stay on track?
Usually I work in terms of coaching. I usually am working with younger middle managers, which is my sweet spot. I like to work with them before they're broken and help them become great leaders. My great goal in life is to take today's generation of young leaders and make them the next generation of great leaders. They're not necessarily broken, but a lot of times they're in trouble. They realize the key is they know there's a better way, right? They're looking around, their bosses aren't very good, their peers don't know what they're doing. Like me when I first became a dean, right? That's what I'm looking for. But they know there's something else out there. I help them cut through a lot of the BS, and I help them see what their values are and how they can function. In terms of organizations, they're by and large going to reach out to me when they're either in a change mode, they need to change, or something has changed. There's a new administration and they're trying to figure out how to make it work with the people they have, that sort of thing. Or maybe there is some sort of a crisis in terms of, and I use that word very cautiously, it's an overused word, but there's some sort of crisis that needs to be fixed in terms of leadership. They're hemorrhaging people. And most of those people don't want to hear that they're a bad boss and wouldn't reach out to me to begin with. And I really can't help them if they don't want to hear me.
So what is a great leadership toolkit?
Yeah, so that's my freebie. You can go to my website, guidanceforgreatness.com, and you can download the Great Leadership Toolkit, or you can just go to thegreatleadershiptoolkit.com. And what that is a series of 5 things you can do, 5 behaviors that you can enact that will help you focus on your leadership. In addition to each of those 5, what I offer is a tiny habit recipe, because I'm also a tiny habits coach. So I am a certified coach under Dr. BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, which is a way of making small changes in your life that lead to much, much bigger things. And we work with recipes, which consist of 3 parts. There's some sort of anchor, some sort of behavior you already do, right, every day. And then there's a tiny behavior you add to that. That's your new habit. And then the third element is you celebrate it, because one of BJ's real insights is that we form habits through emotion, not over time. Repeating something over and over again doesn't make it become a habit, right? What makes it become a habit is some sort of emotion. And we use celebration so that you feel that emotion of success at the end of it. And that helps lock it in. You can form a habit in an instant. that way. So I give 5 of those habits, one for each of the points I'm making in the Great Leadership Toolkit, and those will all get you going in terms of becoming a great leader.
The tiny habits and having that emotional reward makes good sense. You don't have to wait 21 days to do the right thing.
Yeah, and the 21-day thing is not true anyhow. It's not, there's no scientific basis for that whatsoever. And you've heard 21 days, I've heard 90 days, I've heard 60 days. The reason there's so many of them is because they're wrong. All of them are wrong. You can form a habit right then and there, right in one moment. I always give the example of the first time you got a smartphone, right? So you looked at your smartphone, you maybe had a flip phone before that, right? And flip phone was whatever. You put it in your pocket, you waited for it to ring, or waited for when you needed it, then you opened it. But the smartphone, you looked at it, it's beautiful, it's interesting, it's fascinating, really. It's a fascinating piece of technology. When they first came out, they were amazing, like it was mind-boggling. And you're looking at it and it gives you a little endorphin rush. You put it in your pocket, 5 minutes later, you feel this itch. You want to take it out again. And you've been looking at it ever since, pulling it out of your pocket, feeling this urge to look at your smartphone, right? There's people listening to this right now are thinking, I need to look at my smartphone. You form that habit through emotion instantly.
How do startups build the leadership culture?
Exactly the way I said. It's no different. Leadership is leadership. There might be variations, like leadership in the military has life and death consequences, but in the business world, by and large, leadership is leadership at every single level. The leaders at the very top of a massive corporation, the CEO and whatnot, in order to be leaders and not just bosses, mere bosses, need to be doing exactly the same thing as the leader in middle management, the leader at the very bottom of the rung, or the leader doesn't even have a title, because there's always people like that. Plenty of people who are great leaders will never be a boss, will never have a bossing title. So it's the same exact thing. Again, focus on yourself first, which sounds like an act of ego, but it's the opposite. One of my standards is I tell people, take your ego, stuff it in a sack and throw it in the river. That's a constant behavior that leaders have to do. They have to take their ego and just toss it out, get rid of it. Don't worry, it'll come back. You can't kill it. But you do need to get rid of it every now and then, right? But it'll come back right quick. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Your ego's going nowhere. But you need to consciously take it and put it aside, right? You need to do that. It doesn't matter whether you're leading one person or a million people or just yourself. It's the same behavior. You still need to focus on yourself, build yourself up, make your character strong, have integrity, right? Integrity requires wholeness and solidity in order to be reliable, right? So focus on your integrity, focus on your character, focus on your behavior. How do you act? Not what you intend, not what you think you do, not, oh, on Saturdays I work at the soup kitchen, so I must be a good person. Well, if you're a monster during the week, you're a monster, right? And so what we need to do is we need to think about our values and our behaviors. It doesn't matter whether you're a brand new startup in order to become a better person. And that will make you a better business person and it'll make you a better leader.
I find it interesting when someone is in a startup phase of their business, they're a creator of whatever the business is. And then if they're successful, it starts to blossom. And then, which means then you're scaling, which then means you're adding to your space, whether they're employees, they're contractors, even the customers. How do you get the business owner to understand, listen, you've gone from Genesis to now the motor's starting to hum and you're starting to grow. How do you get them to transition and start paying attention to the cues? Because ego, like you said, some of that you need that ego to start off with, but at a certain point in time, you got to temper that so you don't come across as a complete jerk downstream.
First off, I would say there's a difference between confidence and narcissism, right? There's a distinction to be made there, right? You go too far if the confidence becomes narcissism and arrogance, right? And there is a line, and the line can be different for different people, but you're absolutely right. You need to constantly keep that ego in check. You need to figure out ways of doing that. The earlier you start, the better off you'll be, right? So if you actually learn to check your ego early on, I'm not talking about false humility, all right? I'm not talking about hanging your head and looking humble all the time. I'm talking about really checking your ego, thinking, Like, is my ego in the way here? Is it in the way of this relationship? And can I just move it aside and just build the relationship? The more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. It's a skill. And once you start doing that, it doesn't really matter the scale. Now, as you scale up, there's other factors that come in, right? There's cultural factors. And then there's things about hiring and approaching the culture that are very key to maintaining all that. But it always comes back to you tapping into your values. And I help people with that as well. How do you hire? How do you affect change in a culture? In a large culture, I used to do this all the time with the people in the world who are most resistant to change, university faculty. How do you actually pull that off? And again, it's always tapping back into those values and into the mission and what you all share. And if someone doesn't share it, they probably don't belong there. If you can't convince them to share in the mission, they probably don't belong in your organization.
Is that an age thing, you figure?
What do you
It-
mean?
when you're, I mean, you can have an ego at any age. And again, sometimes you can be a narcissist at any age. But as we progress on, we tend to, for some people, don't like change. We get locked in, we figure stability. Although that might be you're now in a rut, which case you're now in your decline. First off, how do you recognize, oh shoot, sometimes the little voice inside your head goes, I'm missing something, I'm deserving something, and I've just skipped the beat and I can't put my finger on it, which means get someone to talk to you about it or check in with somebody. But if you're starting to progress, what are the tells for the person, the leader, to realize I was pretty good, now something's gone askew, or I'm complacent, and I'm just
Yeah.
one person we were interviewing previously, he says, if you hire somebody, you can have a millennium, and you can have X generation, you can have other generations, you can have a hodgepodge, and you have perspectives continuously around you, as long as not everybody's going, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I agree with that. The tell can be very personal, right? But it is that level of cognitive dissonance. Something doesn't fit. The problem is, as you get older, you become less self-aware, right? And that's a matter of wisdom. That's a matter of wisdom. We think of older people as being wise. The older person who doesn't want to change is not very wise at all. It doesn't matter what age. It's not very wise. You need to be willing to change. You need to be willing to assess yourself. And I'll give you an example right out of my own life. I was raised, I'm about to turn 60. I was raised to believe that you went into adulthood, you kind of became who you are, right? And then you kind of just stayed that way. And I watched people, including my father, make themselves miserable with that belief. My father died with that belief. He wasn't very happy. He was a great father, but he made himself miserable. He suffered for it. You can and must change. I learned this. I left higher ed. I knew I could change. I didn't have the mechanisms. Tiny habits actually helped me immensely. When I became a tiny habits coach, I discovered the skill of change. That's what tiny habits teaches you. It teaches you how to change yourself. And you make these little changes and they grow sometimes very rapidly. I used to be a guy who never exercised, right? Now I don't know how many push-ups a day through tiny habits, right? That's just one small example. I was the kind of guy who thought, I just really can't, I am this kind of guy, right? And then I realized, no, I can change my mindset. And I knew this from education. Carol Dweck, 15 years ago, wrote a book called Mindset, right? Where we used to think that people were born intelligent or unintelligent, and they pretty much stayed that way their whole lives. Oh no, she pointed out that you can actually grow your intelligence. You can actually change your IQ through learning, right? That's what education is about. Education is inherently optimistic, right? You're going to change someone. You're going to change through learning. So I realized, why don't I apply those principles to myself? I can change my mindsets, right? I can change who I am. I can drop those limiting beliefs and replace them with positive. And this is an ongoing struggle, but anyone can do this. If you've given up, of course, you can't do this because you've given up, right? But that's a self-imposed limit, right? That is self-imposed. So if you're the type of person who's the type of person, right? I'm this kind of person. Wrong. You don't have to be. If that makes you miserable, stop. Change yourself. And that's my mission for myself, is to change myself for the better. So I don't have a miserable dotage as I get older, right? I don't want to be in a nursing home filled with this idea that this is who I am and I can't change it. I want to be able to change right up to the moment of my death and for the better.
Jim, whether you're a spouse or you're an employer, or even if you've been sent to HR,
Oh, yeah. There's a host of ways. One is listen. Two, but take your ego out of it. That's a big part of it. That's really hard. In fact, having a spouse or a partner is a great way to practice. You've got to take your ego. Why is this bothering me? Why do I? And the funny thing is, in recent years, I've become much more, I've been married for 35 years. My wife and I adore each other, but we have been, sometimes you get on each other's nerves. You do these things. And in the past few years, I've even realized, like, okay, so my wife doesn't wipe the counter. It takes me 2 seconds to wipe the counter. It's not important to her. It's important to me. I'll wipe the counter. Who cares? Right? What's the big deal? It used to drive me to distraction, right? You just make those choices. So when you're going into a difficult conversation, number one, take a deep breath, right? Center yourself. Think about where you're coming from. Where is my ego in this? Why do I care? What is bothering me about this? And then there's a whole host of techniques. I have one that I accidentally invented that I still don't have a name for. And I've tried to write it up and it's weird. So let me see if I can explain it to you. And one time when I was a dean, one of my faculty members called me up at night, which is exceedingly rare, called me up at night in tears. She had been called by the controller of the university and reamed out over a budgetary issue because she supposedly didn't do something. This is so inappropriate. She was called at home. This is so inappropriate. So many different levels. One thing, the faculty member doesn't report to the controller, neither do I, that the controller should be going through me, not the faculty member, right? This was just, and that controller was a bully. She was a nasty piece of work. And she was bullying my faculty member, that will not fly even a little bit. This will not get off the ground with me. If you try to bully my people, you are going down. And I had no authority over the controller. I knew my boss and her boss, who were both executive vice presidents, hated each other. Her boss actually had all the power because he had the president's ear. So I'm in the loser end of this. But I decided I'm not putting up with this bullshit. So I immediately had my assistant, and I don't do it myself. I have my assistant do it to send a message. I had her arrange a meeting with the controller and the faculty member in my office. This controller, this is one of the few times I ever saw her outside her damn office. Right? She never left that office. She comes to my office. The faculty member's there. She's literally shaking. So this is a tell that she knows she did wrong. She did this because she's a sadist, right? She's a bully. She gets off on this. And I'm calling her out because most people wouldn't. So she's literally shaking. And I say to her, okay, you guys had this conversation, and I had faculty member represent what was said, and the controller's, oh, that's not what happened. And yeah, that's exactly what happened. She's lying. But I realized this is a he said or she said situation, right? I can't just take my faculty member's side and beat the controller up. I've got to figure out a way through this. So what I did was I said, oh, so you agree that if you had done this thing, that would be bad if you had said these things. Oh, yes. But I never said that. But you agree that would be a bad thing. And we just had this conversation where I ended up having her agree that all her behaviors were awful. We never had a problem with her again. And I used to do this with faculty members, staff members, anybody who would act out, have a faculty member say something that was borderline racist in the classroom. Student comes to me to complain. I talk to the faculty member. Faculty goes, oh, I never said such as, oh, but we're in agreement. That would be a bad thing, right? And so I'd forge these agreements with these people, always with a third party in the room. I'd forge these agreements with these people where they would agree not to ever behave like that because that's a bad thing. But I would never force them to admit that they did because that was counterproductive at that point. I got the behavior I wanted. I wanted them to change. I didn't want to be punitive. I wanted to be corrective. And it's a form of corrective behavior management.
It's interesting. You love them to save face, but at
Yeah.
the same time, especially if there's an ego attached, right?
Mhm. Yeah. When someone just denies and you know they're lying, you know they're lying. Like the other party has no reason to have created this entire scenario. You know they're lying. Or they're saying, I said that, but this is what I meant. And you know that's BS. You can sit there and beat them up, but what's the point? Don't call them out in the lie. Don't get them to agree. They're lying for a reason, because this actually, they know better, right? And you're appealing to their better angels, and you're helping them save face. And you're sending a message that you're not to be messed with.
Dr. Jim, you're obviously a man that has a vision. Can you tell me the vision you have for the next generation of leaders?
I want to turn them into the next great generation of leaders. I want to rid the world of bad bossing. I want to help lead a movement where we get rid of the bad bosses. We don't have to put up with this crap. We don't have to put up with it in the workplace. We don't have to put up with any organization with leadership. We don't have to put up with our politicians. And we do. We put up with this nonsense with our politicians. They're bullies. Who needs these people? Why would anybody vote for these people? And we don't have to have this. The way we change the world for the better is we change the leadership of the world for the better. And the great thing is, this is the beauty about really great leadership. Great leaders beget great leaders. They create great leaders, because part of being a leader is being a teacher. And you want to bring up the next generation, right? So you have people, you're a manager, right? And you want to be a great leader, help other people be great leaders through your example, but through guidance. And then guess what? When they move up into management positions, they're great leaders. And then they do the same, and so on. And it just goes on. It's like compound interest. And then maybe they go to another organization and they spread the word there, right? We can create a whole movement just by being good leaders. This is the legacy of a leader. This is the great legacy of a leader, right? To create other great leaders. That's what you're going for.
Jim, the people that you serve, is it just in the continental U.S., North America, or are you global?
I stick to English speakers. Yeah, and I work with anyone, anywhere. I mostly work remotely. If they're local, I live in Hudson Valley, New York State. So if I can get to them, I'll go there. But otherwise, it's Zoom. Zoom.
Dr. Jim, how do our members reach you?
The easiest way is to go to my website, which is guidanceforgreatness, all one word, .com. And you can also download the Great Leadership Toolkit from there. Another thing to do is to check out my Substack. I have a blog and podcast. I put out an essay every week, and that is at Jim Salvucci, JimSalvucci.substack.com. Okay, so you can go there. It's called On Leading with Greatness. So please check that out. That also appears on Spotify and Apple and other podcast platforms if you want to listen to it. And I also have a LinkedIn newsletter. It's the same essay. So I get a lot of use out of it. And a series of those essays. I've been doing this for 4 years. So I have over 200 of these essays. And that is what formed the basis of my book that's coming out. So the other thing you can do is you can look for my book is Greater Than Great. And it will be coming out in early 2025. And it consists of 30 essays. And you can read it cover to cover, and it has a cohesive argument throughout, or you can just pick it up, drop in anywhere you want, and just read an essay on any topic on leadership.
I want to say thank you to Dr. Jim Salvucci, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and Youth and Act for Business listeners. If you're just starting into your management position and you want to do the best you possibly can, reach out to Jim.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KIVINSIGH.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.